Welcome everyone to Therapeutic Astrology Podcast by me, man. I am so happy today because we are speaking with Gary Lachman, who is an author and lecturer on consciousness, counterculture, and Western esoteric tradition. He is the author of 25 books. Today we are talking about the latest, Touched by the Presence, which is a book that will answer the question of how Gary went from being a musician in Blondie, Iggy Pop, and in his own band, The No, to then becoming a writer on esotericism and history of consciousness. And he presents himself in the book as an independent thinker and also an unrepentant obsessive reader. So I'm really happy to welcome him here and to invite him to think out loud with us about some of the stuff that I read in the book. Welcome, Gary Lachman.
Oh, thank you very much. It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
So, man, the themes in this book, you're trying to find yourself, and then not just yourself, but then the true self submerged beneath layers of sleep and automation. And I also like the quote you have around the power of ideas, because you say the power of ideas had won me over, and it would be the power of ideas that became the ruling passion of my life. So I just want to hear just how do you present this book? What are the core themes for you, if you to say?
Um, well, it's actually it's an odd book. I mean, it's a memoir. As you say, it's fundamentally about how I went from from being before I was a musician, my years before that, my early years and teens, and then after. Some years ago, about 20 years ago now, a bit more than that, I wrote an earlier memoir, which is only about my time in music. It was specifically about the rock and roll period. It was written in that kind of rock and roll, diary kind of way, and not introspective at all or anything like that.
Mhm.
But I just wrote this. This is an odd book because it's I didn't suggest it to one of my publishers, and which I usually do with an idea and then get commissioned. Basically you get some money up front and then you can write the book. I just sat down and started writing it. And I won't go into detail about this, but at the end of the book, if anyone gets it and reads it, in the acknowledgments, it'll say I wrote this during a very difficult period in my life, and it was a difficult time. And it's kind of an assertion of my own identity, as you say. It's like the search for, the quest for, or the making of, in a certain way, at a time when myself later in later years. I mean, I just turned 70. I wrote it when I was over 67, 68. So um, that identity actually, was threatened from existentially from events in the world outside. So in a way, it was a way for me to assert my identity during a very difficult time, and I did this by answering this question that people have asked me. They say, I mean, oh, you used to play in these bands and you did all that. Now you've written all these books. How did that happen? So I said, okay, well, how did that happen? And so I just sat down and started writing that. And I let that go. And it's one of the first things I've written where I didn't have a plan or anything
Mm.
ahead. I mean, usually, I write nonfiction. So it's, books about ideas and what we said, power of ideas and the passion, that kind of thing. This is something I love doing. I love getting interested in a body of work, someone's ideas, and then trying to understand them and then see how they are in life and things of that sort. Um, but this was just, oh, well, this is about me,
It's about
which
you.
is an odd thing. And I usually, talks I've been giving us, I usually write about other people and they're dead,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
so far,
Still here, still
not
here.
going, it's still around. So I just started writing that and it went back to the earliest influences on me in a way, which were comic books. And then from that to kind of fantasy fiction and science fiction, and gradually, and then see, and people. It's a kind of story of books as well. It's a story of a reader.
That's because
Um,
of the power of ideas,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, because I mean, when I don't know where that comes from, because no one in my family were readers. I come from what in the States is called a blue collar family, so basically working class, family. And although my sister she went on to have a college education and teach.
Okay.
Um, my parents didn't, and but I was just from very early on. I said comic books. I was about 5 years old
Mm.
when I first started reading them, and I say in the book is that I mean, we just say comic books and all that, but actually, if you have any kind of imagination when you're young, they introduce you to this fantastic other worlds.
Yeah.
I mean, and I grew up during a particular time, which is called the Silver Age in comics, in the early 1960s. And there was bright, colorful, very optimistic, futuristic, fantastic characters and fantastic role models and all that kind of thing too. I even later on, much later on, I wrote an article about how they could be role models for children, for the Times educational supplement here. But yeah, that was the first introduction to me, and then gradually, from reading comic books, I got introduced to reading books. And initially, it was like fantasy and fiction and all, science fiction, H.G. Wells and all that kind of thing. But then at some point, I don't know, somewhere along the line, I somehow thought I wanted to be a poet. I don't know where that came from. Um, Adolescence, I don't know, 12, 13, something like that. And it came from listening to pop music at the time, because that was back in the time when lyrics were actually mattered to some degree. Not always, but Bob Dylan and John Lennon, and people were trying to say something, and I remember there was at some school fair, um, there was like a book fair trying to encourage other children to read. They didn't need to do that with me, but I got, it was like a paperback book, and one page was poetry. So, William Blake or something like that, or
Mm.
William Wordsworth. And then the other page was like a Bob Dylan song, the lyrics to it, or um, Lennon and McCartney, A Day in the Life or something like that. And so it was like, oh yes, the music that you're listening today, today's generation, they're listening to is like, the poetry and and I just somehow, so I couldn't play any music. I didn't grow up learning any music. That I picked that up later on in my later teens, but I started writing, lyrics like that, rewriting songs, lyrics, and that kind of thing. So that where that came from, I don't know. Um, but then, yeah, I just became fascinated with all that. I wanted to learn more and more about that, wherever that may take me in a variety of different directions. Once
Yeah.
I mean, reading, it's one of those things. I don't know what it is today. I don't know if being online is the same thing. I'm not, so I can't judge, and I don't want to sound like some old, dinosaur who does it, who's not with it. But I know for me, discovering the library and
Yeah.
just rows and rows and rows of different, open a book and suddenly you're out in another world, wherever it could be. So it was that outer exploration, but it was also inner as well. My response to the books, how, where was that coming from? And so it introduced me to my inner world too, and all that. So, yeah, that was it. But I mean, in that specific line that you quoted from the book, that's about a particular book I read at a particular time. Many years later, well, from my adolescence and early teens, when I was first playing in music, and I was living on the Bowery in New York, which is, now you can't afford cappuccinos or anything. Back then, it was like a horrible place, what they call Skid Row, homeless people and
Okay.
all
Yeah.
of that. Um, but while I was living there and playing with Blondie in the early days, this would have been the spring of 1975, I came across a book that's just called The Occult.
Mm.
And this was by this British writer, Colin Wilson. And I mean, this is this that that was the beginning of what I many years later wound up writing about, things of that sort. But at that time, I had never had any interest in it really. I'd read a lot, but I wasn't interested in that kind of stuff. Weird fiction, but not ghosts and witches and stuff like that. I was, spells. I wasn't interested in anything like that. But
Mm.
this was such a fantastically readable history of, but also kind of philosophical exploration of, but not in any academic dry way. In a very, he's a popular writer.
Mm.
And what convinced me was the way he argued his ideas about consciousness. So that's why I said after reading that book, I was convinced by his ideas and power. Because a lot of people don't think, oh, an idea is just an idea. That's just an idea. It's kind of like the same. Similarly, when we say imagination, oh, that's just your imagination.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But both ideas and imagination, and they go together.
It's powerful.
Yes, and they basically go together. I mean,
Yeah.
I think one of the you need to have a certain amount of imagination just to grasp the reality of an idea, what it actually, you know,
Yeah, what it can do and where
what
it
yeah, the consequences of it, and that to me is what imagination's about. It's about being able to grasp realities that are not just sensible, realities in front of your face, the realities that extend beyond the immediate moment,
yeah.
that you can't see, but you can know them through your mind and through imagination. So in any case, we're getting a long way from that, but that was that was my introduction to this kind of world. And after that, I read everything by this writer, Colin Wilson. I eventually wrote a book about him, and
And
he's throughout the book. I mean, he turns up in the book often. I made a pilgrimage to where I live in London now because of reading him. Basically, I've lived in London now for 30 years and made a career writing books because of reading that book 50 years
because of
ago
him.
on the Bowery.
Wow.
Yeah,
Because of him. Yeah, but
yeah,
and
yeah.
you traveled together or something, right? He's with you. You did stuff together. He stayed with you or something, right?
Well, yes, well, many. I mean, he died in 2013, but many years ago when I was still living in Los Angeles, I had I met him in the early 1980s when I was on a kind of what I call a mini search for the miraculous, in Europe. I went to Chartres and um, Notre Dame and Glastonbury and other kind of sacred sites. But he lived his widow Joy, whom I know still lives there,
Okay.
in the far west of England here, in an area called Cornwall.
Uh,
And in 1983, as part of this tour I was on with a friend, I made a separate pilgrimage to visit him and started, not very close. He had lots of fans, lots of people were turning up all the time, but and a friendship and an acquaintance, or whatever correspondence. And then some years later, he was I was living in Los Angeles. He was there to give some lecture tours. He was promoting a book, and he was staying at a rather kind of uncomfortable sort of motel sort of thing. And at the time, I was working at a very well-known metaphysical bookshop called the Bodhi Tree.
mm,
It doesn't exist anymore. And the owners were on holiday, and I was house sitting for them. And they had this fantastic three-story. It's a place I call the Zen Castle in the Hollywood Hills in Laurel Canyon, and it had a terrace garden and a jacuzzi, and just it was fantastic. And so and I just said, "Would you like to stay instead of staying at this dinky little motel? Would you like to come and stay there?" So he came and stayed with us in this fantastic place. And I've visited down in Cornwall, several times and all that. So,
so that's very
is
special,
that?
right? That's
I'm
very
sorry. Go
special.
ahead.
That's very special after having read him and really been so into his ideas and his books, and
Mm,
then actually having some kind of friendship with him in real life person. That's very special.
mm. Well, yeah. I mean, I was able to do that, and I was so driven by it. I mean, one way I was able to do it is that I had earlier. Um, as a musician, I had done, I had some success. A couple songs of mine did fairly well. I mean, one of them, the title of my current book, Touched by the Presence, comes from the title of a song
Mhm.
called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," which was a top 10 hit in the UK and Europe, not in the States so much, but these parts. Probably before you were born, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a while back.
Yeah.
But it's about these sort of psychic, telepathic experiences I was having with my then girlfriend at the time.
Mhm.
We were having shared dreams, or when one of us wanted to call the other one knew, and all that sort of thing was happening. So I wrote a song about that, and then that's what the title of the new book
Yeah.
comes from.
So
But
he had listened to that, and then
sorry.
so he knew you from the music.
Oh, no, no, no. He didn't. No, no. I'm just saying because I was saying that because that song was fairly successful. It was a big hit, you get gold record and all that. So at a certain point, I had, I was independently, not necessarily wealthy, but I was okay. I could travel and do whatever I wanted to do, and
Like
so
that. Okay, yeah.
that's why I could afford to go on this
Image.
European adventure.
Yeah.
Spent a couple months in, and but I started reading him in 1975. Then I read this other book of his in 1977 called The Outsider, which was an earlier book, which is about sort of existentialism. So it had nothing to do with the occult or anything like that, or paranormal, or it was about people like Sartre and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and Hermann Hesse and all this kind of alienation and how certain individuals driven by a kind of um, well, passion for ideas or an intensity of being. They're what happens to them? How are they successful? Are they unsuccessful? What worked for some didn't work for others, and all that kind of thing. And I identified with these. I had read a lot of the people, and I identified with this kind of character he was talking about.
Yeah.
And that would have been the summer of 1977,
Yeah.
and I was 21. I was quite young, so young and impressionable, and that's the best time to read these sorts of books, and they make
Yeah, and
a stamp on you, and it's like, and some people they read these things when they're young, and they're very excited, and then they grow up and say, oh well, yes, when I was younger, I felt really excited, but now I'm realistic and I have lowered expectations, and I need a new, flat wall screen TV. And I just went, that's it. That's
yeah.
that's all I know how to do.
Yeah.
That's the other thing is anytime I tried to be in the real world, it was complete utter catastrophe and failure. So,
I mean, there is that synchronicity that 1977 that's known by astrologers that's where Chiron was discovered, and that's the
mm.
wounded healer, and that's the outsider, that's the maverick.
All
The
right, okay, well there
original,
you go.
quite original type, right? So there's that. But yes, definitely. I have so many questions for you, so I better start
No,
giving.
no, please. So I'm just rambling on. You have to forgive me. I just talk. So,
That's good. It's all good. But so let's follow that thread about this saying. I didn't even know it came from this person you're presenting, Laying. The sane response to an insane world. Um,
R.D. Lang, yeah, yeah.
yeah, can you share more about we are trapped in this schizoid psyches he's talking about?
Well, this was, I mean, well, there's two things here. Well, R.D. Lang, he was very, very popular in the 1960s, in the 70s, and kind of, well, he died fairly young and sort of lost his popularity by the 1980s. But he developed this whole idea that schizophrenia was not, it was induced by the family. It was induced by the family setting. So it wasn't organic, or it wasn't necessarily a kind of battle between your superego and your id, or whatever, something along those lines. It was something, and it's the sort of double bind where you're in a relationship with a parent that in one way presents themselves as the loving parent, and that's something as a young child you need, and you're defenseless and all that, but at the same time they do the complete opposite.
And so they're basically
I
guess right.
I love you, don't you? When everything else they say they do is like, no, you don't, you don't.
Like,
But
don't
if
say
you,
like
it's worth gaslighting or whatever it is. So this creates this double bind, which is this hard. I mean, most of the people I knew had the same kind of thing. This is kind of, I think it kind of runs through most what we call dysfunctional families, which is almost a redundancy, but it's or perhaps I don't know, perhaps my familial experiences was not as common as I think it might be, but still it was this sort of situation where Lang was saying that schizophrenia or kind of madness was a kind of sane response to the situation that was what another psychologist who I later learned about and drawn a lot, Abraham Maslow, called schizogenic situations which create kind of schizophrenic, kind of this kind of schism. And the schizophrenic doesn't mean split personality; it means a schism between your inner world and reality in some way. There's a cut, or what we
yeah.
say, a disconnect there. And So, and there was the family, then the extended sort of metaphor of the family with society and a variety of different kinds of, you know, uh, insane kind of behavior that's accepted in society. If it was behavior that was, if it was localized in an individual, we would recognize it as somehow, mad. But we, in other ways, on a large scale, we accept it. Whatever it might be, nuclear war, whatever, or a variety of different kinds of things, and people who react to that, and in the sense of, recognizing that this is not right, but
Yeah.
they can't handle with the world. They have this kind of,
Mm.
breakdown. And he thought in a way that was a kind of positive response in a certain sense. And but I mean, when I was, I mean, he had here in London in the 60s, he had this whole place called Kingsley Hall, which was very, very famous, where people would go and they would, taking LSD was part of it, and they would
Oh,
induce kinds of very radical
okay.
cathartic states and all that kind of thing. That never happened with me. I just was reading his books. In New Jersey, I'm some 15 years old reading these books about how, yes, you're the divided self. Yes, your parents are driving you crazy. Yes, he's absolutely right. And
Check,
that
check,
kind of
check, check.
that kind of thing. Yeah. So I mean, there was a whole his books were part of a whole, what do you want to call, a kind of canon of counterculture literature. Alan Watts was, Carlos Castaneda, the Herman Hesse novels, things of that sort were all part of this, general um, body of, literature that teenagers like myself, were reading. And it was a tail end of the 60s where the whole idea of like do your own thing, be
Mm.
independent, don't conform, still had a certain currency. And I was impressionable and young enough to swallow it whole.
Oh, well, good. I think good that you did. Uh,
Yeah.
let's actually follow that, because then you also talk about the false world in an existential sense. It's when you talk about seeing the isness of things,
Mm.
their being, and this quote you say, the Gnostics, whom I later came to study through my interest in Jung, claimed that we live in a false world, that the universe of space and time and matter was the work of a kind of idiot god who believed he was the true creator, but who had really usurped power from his master. Can you talk to
Oh
us about
yeah,
that?
well that is a fundamental sort of theme, in this kind of Gnostic worldview. Uh, Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge, but it's a kind of knowledge. It's not the sort of knowledge you get from reading books or study or logic or experiment, which is what the Greeks called episteme. But gnosis is a kind of direct, immediate, felt, a visceral, almost kind of experience of reality. Actually, I'm giving later on next month, I'll be giving a talk about this, for this group called the Philosophical Research Society in the States. It's online, about how that kind of Gnostic notion of a false world is actually part of our kind of common, perception these days. The whole notion of post-truth and alternative fact, and this chaos that's going on all the time, and we don't know what's true, what's in, AI and all that kind of thing. So the Gnostics were around 100, 200 AD in the early years of the, beginning of Christian, period. They have a very different idea of what Christ was about than what became the official church. And so in a sense, they didn't believe in a literal crucifixion and a literal resurrection of the dead. These are more spiritual kinds of experiences. These were sort of esoteric inner experiences that, if you follow the certain teachings, the Gnostic Gospels, I mean, they became known in 1945. They were discovered in Egypt, and Nag Hammadi, and I don't know, Lane Pagels wrote a wonderful book about it called the Gnostic Gospels. So these were Gospels that were written around the same time as what we know as the official Gospels, but they present a very, very different kind of Christ than what became the Petrine Church. Um, but their notion of a false world was that
Yeah.
um, the God of the Old Testament, Jehovah, was not the real God.
Mm.
He's what again, a lot of this is steeped in Platonic, metaphysics, but Jehovah is what is a kind of, because the real God doesn't bother to do any of the hands-on stuff. The real God doesn't do any create. He hires out. He hires out somebody else to do it. So there's
Sure.
what they call the demiurge or the creator God. So the real God calls in this other God to make me a world, all right?
Mm.
And the other God does it and is so kind of, full of himself, from doing such a wonderful job that he forgets that he's in the employ of the other God and just believes, hey, that's me. I'm God. I'm the God. I'm it. And
Mm.
we are in that world that
Okay.
he has created. But within us, there's a spark of the divine light from the God above the God. Um, and gnosis is the experience of that divine light.
Mm.
And so their sense of the false world is the whole world of time and space, the whole world of, the stars and the cosmos. This is like a great trap that we're in some way.
Mm.
And the whole idea is to somehow return but I mean it's like a Philip K. Dick. That's why a lot of like Philip K. Dick or The Matrix or all that kind of stuff, that whole idea that all those things play on this Gnostic theme of a false world.
Mm.
And there's all these sort of demons and what they call the archons that you have to deal with and all that. But I was using that metaphor, but I said, in my experience then when I was a teenager, first becoming aware of existentialism and things like that, reading, because I had a teacher in high school who was giving me Sartre and Nietzsche and Camus. He was teaching the rest of the class whatever was on the curriculum. He just giving me, and he testing me on that stuff. But the false world there was this world in which, my parents, teachers, other adults, other people, it was sort of like they seemed to have answers for everything.
Yeah.
But actually, no, this was just how things are, and if you probe things, you went a bit deeper with your questioning about
Yeah.
anything. What's all this for? What's the point? Where, which are the existential kinds of questions? What's the meaning of this? Am I leading a real life? Is this an authentic life? And
Right. Yeah.
that was kind of like, you're not supposed to do that. And
Mm.
so, I mean, as I was more and more reading that kind of stuff, I was sort of, in a way, it's a kind of metaphor of like you're poking your finger through this paper wall. It was just scenery, but you had accepted it as reality, and suddenly you realized you could do that. And it was like it was the destructive thing in a way, because all of the accepted norms and values and whatever it might be, suddenly they fell away. But it's greatly liberating. So that's, my initial kind of introduction to those kinds of questions about, okay, I find myself here in this world. What am I supposed to do now that I am here? And where's the direction? All these guides that I've been given as I've been growing up, they've turned out to be hollow and false, but I don't
Yeah.
see any others. And so it's up to me and all that kind of thing.
You just
So
realized it. You just realized it young, I think. I think that's lucky for you. I mean, you realized it young, right?
I
Compared
was
to
about
others.
15, around,
That's really
14,
young.
15. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, but again, it was a time in a lot of, I said, I don't know about today, but I know my sons, I have two sons who are in their 20s, but when they were similarly that age, they weren't, they're just not readers. So, I mean, and maybe I'm an anomaly, but I was reading all this stuff. And
Mm.
so it had this, I was reading Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. I think that was like the first serious, some people might say it's not particularly serious, but no, but I think it is. I still have a great love of Hesse, even though it's,
I mean, I
I've
love
changed quite a bit. But it was the first thing that introduced me to any kind of question about who are you?
man, that
You know what I
teaching
mean?
experience, that's so
Because
special.
up until then, you just accept everything, and you're
Mm.
interested in the world. What's that about? What's that about? But then you take yourself for granted, and then suddenly it turns around, and you're looking at yourself in some way, and you think, oh, who am I?
But
What is this all about? What am I? All those kinds of questions. So that was the introduction I got from when I was 14, when this hippie girl gave me a copy of Siddhartha.
I love that.
So
It is, I don't want to reduce it to that, but it is a Capricorn thing to actually be mature at the beginning. And then, I mean, you're supposed to, you're
supposed to be
supposed,
lightening up now, huh? Ooh,
yes,
wow, I'm going to have a party
you're
after
supposed to
this.
be more of
Yeah,
a child anyway. Uh,
yeah.
but, uh, But I love that learning experience that you're writing about, that he's feeding you these books. This is how it should be,
Mm,
differential learning, studying it from wherever you are at. So that's just amazing. And I feel the questions you're talking about, I just not the questions because I've had them for a long time, but the turning around and looking at yourself, that's
mm, mm.
for me a new discovery just last week. It feels
Really,
like,
yeah.
you know,
Mm.
it's
Well, I mean, it
it's a
is. I
big
mean, we
deal
tend
you
to
had that.
take everything for granted, and then like the thing you take most for granted is you. Who the hell am I? And I don't even mean, I mean, okay, I'm Gary and you're Mona, but like, okay, but who are they?
Yeah.
You can go. One of the metaphors or a thing to think about, if you have an amnesia, right? You don't remember who you are, but you still know you're an I in some way. There's an I, because you asked that question, who am I? So
Mm,
we're all, suffering from a kind of amnesia in the sense that, okay, I might know I might know my name that's on my passport, but who is that person? So,
mm.
I'm still working on that one. So, I mean, that was one reason I wrote that book.
Yeah, no, I definitely have that as a Pisces. I have no idea, and I didn't when I was a child either know who I was. But and I think that's why I'm drawn into the mysteries as well. Um, and I really want to hear. So I have so many questions for you. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
keep down the anxiety because there's an anxious part of me that's reminding me that I haven't asked you all of these questions.
Well,
But
you're not going to ask me all of them anyway,
I'm not
so just
gonna, so just relax, man. I'm not gonna
yeah.
even, no matter what. But I really feel like asking you, having written so many books, and I just, the listeners will know that there are so many big books out there by you that when we are curious about a topic, you probably wrote something about it. And so I just feel like asking you what, I mean, how that is for you. I know that some of it is biographies and like
Mm,
studies and something that you're communicating, not necessarily your own opinion, but then
mm, mm.
what did that leave inside of you for an imprint? Do you know what I mean?
Oh no, I've certainly, like you said, it's the power of ideas. So I've
Mhm.
certainly absorbed and been
Yeah.
informed by these things that I've written about. And I want to know. I mean, one of the things that what should I say, I like or is very, very good or I enjoy or is about doing this kind of stuff is I get to say, okay, here's now I figure out what Jung is for me. Okay,
Mm,
or Swedenborg or Steiner, So it's
mm,
not necessarily here's everything you always wanted to know about those guys, because there's other people that are devoted to that more. But it's kind of like, okay, this is what I could get from them. And as we say, the takeaway. So that's sort of me on them. So I'm communicating it to the reader,
mm,
but I'm communicating it to myself at the same time.
yeah.
I think that's one of the I look at it that way. I'm not coming doing these books saying I know all this stuff. I read all the stuff, but by the time I'm sitting down to writing, it's like now I have to put it all together. So it's not like I've got it. It's just like oh, there it goes on the page. And I was okay, how do I put this all together? And
Yeah.
so in a way, I'm implicitly inviting the reader to come along with me on this journey as I try to figure out, how to put all this together in a way where I kind of feel like, yes, that's what I think about that, think about that. But no, I sort of say in this new book, the ones that have had the most influence on me, obviously is Colin Wilson, but other people like Uspensky, who's the Russian writer and philosopher who was a follower of Gurdjieff, but he was also a very, very important thinker in his own right. And a book of his called New Model of the Universe, and I was first reading this kind of thing. This opened up. It's a collection of different sort of essays on different kind of topics. So there's something on the tarot, there's something on the fourth dimension, there's something on hypnotism, there's something on dreams, something on esotericism. So at the time when I was reading it, again, I'm about 22.
Mhm.
All this stuff is brand new to me and it's opening me up. All the whole idea that, running throughout history, there's this kind of esoteric current and what esoteric, what is that? Oh, that's the inner, and it's not necessarily on the surface of things, and you have to see it. And if you like Notre Dame Cathedral, the different, gargoyles and a variety of different, ornaments and things all have alchemical kinds of meanings. Oh, really? Do they? No, so all that was immediately just I was fascinated by all that kind of thing. So it opened that up, so that was an early. And then for a while, in the 1980s, I was involved in the Gurdjieff work. It's called the work or the Fourth Way. Gurdjieff was a Greek Armenian esoteric teacher in the first half of the 20th century. Spensky at the same time. They met in Russia just before the outbreak of World War One, and they worked together, then separated, and then they both more or less died to the late 1940s after World War II. But they developed this whole system of kind of so esoteric psychological development.
Is he the one? I'm remembering. Is he the one who says something? He just answers "think" to a question. Do you remember?
Uh, well, in what? Well,
I
I don't
don't
know if it's the
remember the
same thing.
question.
There's one Spensky in one quotation. Well, it's a quotation from Spensky when he's experimenting. This is before he met Gurdjieff and was on his own. He was experimenting with nitrous oxide and and inducing these, elevated states of expanded consciousness. And he was trying to capture what he was seeing because, again, for him, it had no etic content, meaning he wasn't just wow, he's feeling wonderful. He was actually seeing something
Mm.
that for him was objective, and he wanted to be able to capture it in some way. He's a writer, capture it in words. That's the writer's job. And he wrote "Thinking of the Categories," which was it was the best he could put down. Because in these states, it's like one of the things he talks about when you're in these states, the difficulty in these states, and the whole idea when we say mystical experiences are ineffable, that we can't talk about them, is that it's so much information
Yeah.
of such complexity is given that our powers of expression can't keep up with it. And I've had that experience as well. You start to say something, and the first words you say, it goes like that, and you can't keep going with the sentence because you're already sidelined by because when you get in these kind of states, the sort of states that Uspensky was talking about, or other ones, he was emulating the philosopher William James, who also experimented with nitrous oxide.
Mhm.
And you get in these states without using any kind of substance either as well, although it's quicker. But the whole idea for him was that he was actually seeing something, but the complexity of what he was seeing was so great, and it was coming at him so quickly that he just couldn't capture it in words. And oddly enough, that same kind of experience was recounted centuries earlier by the Hermetists in ancient Alexandria, and around the same time as the Gnostics, because they too were seeking gnosis, but the Hermetists didn't have this notion of, or the Hermetics, the Hermeticists, the followers of Hermes Trismegistus. They didn't have the sense of the world being a prison or a trap, but they did have a sense that there was a greater form of mind. We would say consciousness, a greater kind of mind that they were part of, and then they tried to return to that. And so gnosis for them was a kind of experience of that. But similarly, they talk about this knowledge coming to them in such a rush that
Uh,
you had to be prepared for it in order to like get any picture of it. Um, so that reading that in Spensky's book when I was 22, it just was, yeah, this is fantastic. I wanted to know more about that kind of thing. So but then I was involved in this Gurdjieff work itself, which is a whole system of fighting off one's mechanicalness or or the kind of automatic behavior that we spend a great deal of our time in. And Gurdjieff called it sleep, or he called it mechanicalness.
mhm.
And he had a whole battery of different tactics in order to break down that kind of habitual behavior. And on this mini search for the miraculous I was on in 1983, I went to the site in Fontainebleau outside of Paris, where he had this what he called this Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man, and in the 1920s. So well, 100 years ago, a century ago.
Mm.
Um, many people were coming from England and other places to go and spend time and subject themselves to this. It was yeah. If you think of these stories about the old Zen masters who whack somebody in the head,
Yeah.
and say, now Gurdjieff had that plus many other things like physical labor, all these kind of exercises, Sufi kinds of dances, and all this sort of stuff. So it was remarkable kind of stuff going on at the time. But in
Mm.
any case, in the 1980s in Los Angeles, I was involved for a few years in that school. So
That's
that's something that I was actually doing. You're asking which, so
yeah, yeah,
but I'm too interested in too many things, so I
that,
usually don't stay. I usually don't stay with one thing forever. Although I come back to things, and I've written a great deal about Gurdjieff and Uspensky. I mean, I did a book on Uspensky. I did a book on a fellow named Morris Nickel, who was one of Uspensky's students and who spent time at this institute, who
mm,
actually started out as a follower of Jung and then left Jung to become a follower of Uspensky and Gurdjieff. So I'm, a fellow traveler, as it were. Um, but that was the one. I mean, and earlier than that, for a time, I got involved with an Aleister Crowley, magical group, because I was reading a lot about that. I mean, that was that around the same time when I was first reading Colin Wilson's The Occult. I got introduced to Aleister Crowley's kind of magic and all that sort of thing, and I got very fascinated with it at the
mm,
time. Got involved for a while, but then that after a while, I realized that wasn't my kind of thing. It was a bit claustrophobic. So those two were the kind of schools or systems, whatever you want to call it, that for a while I was one doing certain rituals and
yeah.
certain practices, and the other certain kind of exercises and various other sorts of things. But since then, I'm an independent. I'm a freelance. I kind of you know
Independent thinker. I like
yeah.
that.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you experimented with different disciplines as I'm hearing it, but then what you're mostly into is just a lot of different information. Uh, whatever you feel is touching you, touching your soul.
Hmm.
I'm just pulling up your chart because
Ah,
I have an eye on our time together, and I wanna talk about your astrology with you.
all
And
right.
that
How does it look? Anything good coming up or?
yes, surely, surely. No, I love your chart, and there's several Gemini traits in
Hmm.
your chart, Gemini signatures. And that is that thing where you're not supposed to stick around. You're
All
supposed
right.
to follow whatever piece of information that you find to be interesting. And then of course it
Hmm.
gives you a lot of talent to actually write about it. And also being a Capricorn, you do the actual work
Hmm.
to get there, because otherwise you could just travel around and have fun, but you
Yeah.
actually have done the work to do it, and that's of course both in writing but also in your music. But yeah, do you have any questions other than is everything gonna be good?
Yeah, no, I'm going to meet somebody tall, dark, and handsome, or
Other than that,
no. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, well, I don't know. How does it
how
look?
do
How
you
does it look for this year? How does just in general? How does
how
this?
do, how do you feel about astrology? Let me ask you that first.
Well, how do I feel? I feel about astrology the same way, in some ways, I feel about music, in the sense that I love music, but I can't read music, and I'm not a musicologist. And
Right.
one of my sons is a classical violinist. And I can tell him a piece of music, I like, but I can't talk his language, right?
Cool. Mhm.
So astrology, I believe in it more or less. I've been convinced by some things, but when people start talking about their sextiles and
Yeah,
trines and all of that,
all in.
I just because I can't follow it. So it's like
No
math.
doubt.
I'm horrible at math. So I can't follow that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
in general, I accept it, and even in the book, towards the end, I start saying how I was started to identify with my being a Capricorn, because
Right.
I
You
felt,
do.
well, they're late bloomers often, so I best identify it with that's the best show they've got.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I mean, for fun, I just looked up. your chart on the inside because I have the time of that,
Mm.
and then Colin Wilson. Of course, I don't have
Mm.
his birth time exact to the hour, but
Oh, yeah, I don't know exactly,
I have his day and his year, so
Mm.
that works well. And
Mm.
of course, he's born in the opposite sun sign of yours, right? Just
Right. Okay.
even just that opposites attracts. So your
Right.
sun are opposing each other, right?
Right.
In Capricorn, Cancer. So there's that, and I just find so many wonderful synchronicities. And yeah,
Mm.
because you have that in the book where you also say maybe I was drawn to this guy because he's a Capricorn, but actually I find I've looked up a few people that you mentioned, and actually I think what you're more drawn to is the Scorpio part of people, and
Really?
he has his moon in Scorpio as well. Yeah, it's that
Mm.
the occult, it's
Could
going
be,
deep.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
I,
so I
I, I
think
had one Scorpio friend, but he was, I understand why they're called Scorpio. So,
you get it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's hard on people,
yeah.
to pull through that soul lesson that's in that Scorpio. But anyway,
Mm.
you ask about your year, so I'll go into your transits instead of looking at Colin Wilson.
Okay. I, I don't want to tempt. I don't want to tempt. I'm trying to, it's, well, in the beginning of my book, Touched by the Presence, I talk about the song I wrote when I was with my own band, The No, called
Mm,
Amor Fati, which means love of fate. It comes from Nietzsche. It goes back throughout kind of classical literature. But it's this whole notion, this kind of acceptance, the sort of acceptance of things, and in some ways trying to understand things. When they come to you, there's a reason they're coming to you. It's as you get older, it's one of those things. Well, what else have I got left to do except to sort of see if that really works? But it's funny because I mentioned I'm giving the series in February every Sundays, and it's about ancient Alexandria, and it's the Hermeticists, Gnostics, the Neoplatonists, and early Christianity. But the reason I'm mentioning it is I was rereading some of my stuff about it, and I came across um, this early alchemist named Zosimos of Panopolis, who Jung did a series of lectures on. But he talked about that. He talked about that same thing, and he was interested in astrology back then as well, obviously. But he was kind of the thing was that, well, he was against the idea of somehow using it to avoid what was coming your way. His notion was to like, why is this, coming
yeah,
to you now? What this is part of
exactly.
your destiny. This is part rather
Exactly.
than what spells can I, do to avoid this kind of thing. So it was
Exactly.
just similar sort of thing. So I'm thinking in a
Yeah.
way that's getting around like, well, okay, I don't know. I maybe I don't want to know what's going to happen. I'll just have to,
Yeah, but that's a better question, right? Is why?
yeah.
Like what
Yeah.
and
Yeah, 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 yeah,
how
yeah.
can I
Wait,
best.
why is this happening rather than how can I avoid this?
Yes, because okay, let me answer that.
All right.
I'm not gonna say what, but I'm gonna say why. And why is because there's more for you to discover, even though
Mm,
you've been through so much, there are more revelations about what you are really firmly feeling is how it
mm,
is now. There's something opening up around that. And opening up, it can even be, teaching. And then, like you were talking about, you write and then, but you also
mm,
write to yourself in a way. And so
right.
that could be a part of
Mm,
teaching. The Neptune and Saturn here that we have in Aries, actually, as we speak, we have Neptune going into the sign of Aries, and it's going to stay there for the next 14 years. So that's a big thing.
right.
And Saturn is going to join that configuration. That is something we've talked a lot about in
Right.
astrology. That is
Right.
going to square your sun, meaning it means something to you personally. It's gonna bring some creative flavor to your life.
Right. Okay. Oh. When
Right?
when 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 is that happening, or it's happening now?
It's happening now. In a month, let me know. In a
Hey.
month, in a
All
month
right.
time, it's
Okay.
really
All
a
right.
new chapter.
Okay.
I'd say a
Okay.
new chapter for you. Yeah.
All right. That sounds
Okay.
good.
Okay, let me just check my list here so that maybe my anxious part is going to be really upset that I didn't ask this one question. I had this question about something where I asked you if you wrote this.
Oh, the poem.
Yes. Did you
Yeah,
write that?
yeah, that was well, I it's in a footnote in the book, and I kind of up until then I'm saying how I wanted to be a poet, but I didn't thankfully didn't show any of the poetry I was writing. And at some point I couldn't resist. So I said, okay, I sort of say I throughout the book I've not I've hesitated to show it, but at least let me give you some examples. So this is
Mm,
something I remembered. It wasn't written down, but I remembered it. So
okay.
and I think I gave it a title, Weltschmerz, at 18, which is world sorrow, world pain at 18. And
Mm.
yeah, it's a poem about suicide, basically, or if not suicide, it's a poem about, just accepting, defeat and lying. And but the thing about it is, like, youth is invariably fascinated with death and tragedy and all that kind of the dark goth kind of thing, and the dark, whoever it might be. I mean, all those,
That's
it's an interesting lyric. It's not a fantastic poem, but it's not a bad lyric, and
exactly.
that's what happened. The poetry got turned into writing song lyrics. So okay.
Just one sentence from it so people know what we're talking about. To hammer every day, better to lie still upon the
No,
ground.
no, no, you mix them up. No, no,
Oh,
you had I saw how you had it printed. It's one line and then that. So rather,
yes.
it's not like that. So
Can you say it correctly?
well, you actually want me to read them? Oh my God.
If you want to, because I really love it.
Of what use to me, my friend, the labor all in vain, if in the end I'm laid to rest, I shall not rise again. To hammer every day on the anvil men call art, what use to me, my friend, if in the end we part? And tell me not of heaven, and tell me not of hell, for in my years I've traveled there. What is there to tell? Better to lie still upon the ground and make no move at all, and so be so much closer to the end, if I should chance to fall. It's a Poe pastiche. It's an Edgar Allan Poe pastiche.
I don't know
So
what that is, but I just
pastiche is like written in the style of,
okay, like that.
written in the style of. So Edgar Allan Poe is the
It's Galen.
American, poet, and who again he epitomizes this romantic notion of early death, and he was fascinated with young women, the death of young women,
Okay.
and just not murdering them, but
Okay.
just they're whatever consumption, whatever it might be, this, and it's the whole romantic idea that the world is too brutal and crude for these
Yeah.
sensitive souls,
Well, I think
so
that's right.
that's the whole romantic notion. Well, I mean, but at a certain age you feel like that, but then I toughened up because I just refused to be, I refused to be defeated.
Yes,
So, so
I think it is.
um,
It could be a blend of self-destructive impulses and then some romanticizing about it. But I don't think all youth has this. I think some of
oh, it's true. It's well, I mean, it's I mean, it is kind of, if again, well, whatever. I mean, all the goth stuff, all this, there's so
I think
many
that's because of
in popular culture and rock and all that, and then
right.
also just in literature, you have,
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet, and all this like dying young kind of thing. The
Like that.
Liebestud, the Wagner, with Tristan and Isolde and all, that, because their love, the passion introduces them to a world that's just too tremendous, and who wants to go back to
Yeah.
work on Monday morning after you
Yeah.
have to do that? And so, so there's a whole generation of writers in the 19th century who, this is one of the things Wilson wrote about in his first book, The Outsider. He said all
Okay.
these early generation, in the 19th century, it's like either they went insane or they committed suicide,
Mm.
or for some reason or other, Nietzsche, Nietzsche went insane, Baudelaire went insane, Van Gogh committed suicide, so it was kind of like what cracked them up, what was it that defeated them, and
Uh-huh.
this character that he talks about, this type, the outsider, he goes from the ones that are kind of crushed, and then he finds the ones that are able to kind of affirm their being,
Uh-huh.
against the the negative forces of an indifferent, if not hostile, world around them, and then affirm it so much that they could actually, in some ways, triumph over it. Let us say,
Oh,
and be creative, and
yeah.
in a certain way recreate the world, a little patch of it around them.
Mm.
Let's say.
recreate the world. And so that in a way is what you're doing in this book, is you're showing how you affirmed your being up against that, the suicidal impulse that I just recognize. So I just love sometimes that get a little bit of recognition for.
No, no. I mean, to tell you the, I mean, I mean, not to be melodramatic, but earlier I was saying how, I wrote it during a very difficult time, and
Yeah,
it was that I felt like that was one choice. One choice was to do that. The other choice was to axe murder the antisocial family who lived above me. Yes.
that's
Which
so.
would have led to greater complications, I
Yeah,
think. So, and
yeah,
the other was somehow like, I have to, this is not here. I have to transcend. And so I took that route by going and writing this book and living at the British Library
yeah.
for a while.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did. And I think it's good to put in that little teaser for libraries. Libraries, it's really, I think it's something.
And even they're absolutely, I mean, my God, I don't know what I would do,
Oh, it's
without them.
incredible atmosphere and yeah. Okay, Gary Lachman, we are at the top of the hour. I'm so happy that I got to speak with you. It's been we've been texting for quite some time. I mean, I've read you for quite some time, and so and I still have you. I still have many of your books lying around that I need to dive into. I'm just reading bits and pieces, and I love that you've done that. What a gift for
Oh, well,
us
thank you very much.
to
Thank you.
dive deeper into the occult and yeah. So, is there anything here in the end that you feel like saying? What do you want to send out to the?
Well, if you get a chance, look for my new book called Touched by the Presence. And it's, let's see, the subtitle From Blondie's Bowery and Rock and Roll to Magic and the Occult. So that's as wide a spread as I could make it, folks. Yeah, yeah.
I do love
And if
that
you get a
you
chance, actually, if you get a chance, another thing on YouTube, there's a short film my son made to actually promote the book.
great.
That it's called Touched by the Presence, and
Okay.
his name is Max Jones Lockman. And I'll send you a link,
Yeah, do
and
that.
maybe you can somehow
I'll
attach it on, and
put it in the
and
notes. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be great. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Nice to meet you. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
I look okay a month from now. If anything happens, I'll get in touch.
Yes, yes, please do in a month's
All
time.
right.
It's
Okay,
all starting.
fantastic.
Thank you,
Take care.
Karen.